Hey guys, welcome back to Queens of the Damned Horror Podcast. So this week it's going to be all me. Sorry. I am going to do a little bit on Frankenstein and how we got the Frankenstein movies and what kind of changed between the novel that came out in 1818 by Mary Shelley and some of its influences when the novel first came out, and then the differences that we see in the Universal 1931 Frankenstein that changed how we perceive the character in the book. So I first want to kind of start out with an explanation of the book, because I know there are a lot of people out there who actually haven't read the book. And if you're a horror fan, you really should read Frankenstein, because it was definitely groundbreaking when it first came out. So Frankenstein is a romantic book written by Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley was the wife of Percy Shelley, who is one of the most famous romantic poets. And Mary Shelley actually was not originally Percy Shelley's wife. Percy Shelley was married to another woman and actually had a child with another woman, but he ran off with Mary. And they eventually did get married. So Frankenstein came into existence because Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley and Lord Byron were kind of traveling around with each other in this weird little romantic poet group, and they were also traveling with a physician. They all got together in this little cottage that Lord Byron owned, and it just so happened that this cottage was across from Mont Blanc, which is the subject of one of Percy Shelley's most well-known poems. It's kind of his magnum opus. And kind of the whole point of that poem is questioning the relationship between man and nature. And in the end, he kind of poses this question, nature, what would you be without me? Percy kind of comes to this decision that yes, man is more powerful than nature. And this is important to recognize because Percy had a lot of influence on Mary Shelley's novel. But before I get to that, so this book came into existence because while this troupe was traveling, they settled in this cottage that Lord Byron owned. And in this cottage, they all kind of sat down and they were talking and they all decided, let's do a ghost story challenge. So each of these people were supposed to write a ghost story. Well, Percy and Lord Byron tapped out right away. They kind of decided this is not the stuff we write. Neither of them really have any Gothic literature or Gothic poetry from the time. So, coincidentally, the two probably most narcissistic, sorry, it's going to be very obvious that I don't like Lord Byron or Percy Shelley as I do this. They're probably the most narcissistic of the group, and they're the two who say, yeah, I can't do that. I can't write anything in the Gothic genre. And I find this really funny because I don't know for sure if it was because, like, it's just not something we do, and so we're not capable of it, or if it is more, I don't write stuff like that, kind of like an elitist sort of idea. So it's important to note that Mary Shelley and this physician that was present were the only two to come up with ghost stories from this troupe of authors and poets. And the two that they write end up being some of the most prolific sources of horror literature out there. So, of course, we know Mary Shelley writes Frankenstein, but this physician writes an extremely important novel called The Vampire, which was the influence for Dracula. So without this ghost story competition created among these romantics, we get two of the most important horror characters for the horror world today. Mary Shelley doesn't just, like, come up with this idea out of, like, right away. This idea comes to her in a dream. And she actually, before she had this dream, spent a lot of time trying to think of something. She had this dream and she rolled with it. It's very important to note that Mary Shelley's book is also very referential. And one of the references that is found throughout the book is of Mont Blanc. And that probably does have a lot to do with all of the time that she spent both traveling on Mont Blanc. They went on expeditions through it, and then they also just sat there and it was right in front of them. And it is also important to note that the time that Mary Shelley spent in this area, there were a lot of storms. Mary Shelley probably witnessed a lot of lightning storms, and this could have been one of, definitely not the only, but one of the influences on the book, is the fact that she is just seeing lightning all the time, because the creation of the monster relies so heavily on electricity, which that is partly because of what was going on scientifically at the time. Mary Shelley also, in her lifetime, had many children, and a lot of them died. So, and also her mother died giving birth to her. So she was surrounded by death, and she was very aware of it. And also, because she had so many children, very aware of birth. And so these are two extremely important themes that we see throughout Frankenstein, obviously, because we have the creation, which parallels Adam and Eve, of course. But we also have the importance of death permeating the book. I mean, people die over and over and over in the book, and the monster is created from dead people. So it's also important to note that Mary Shelley, before sending this off, her husband Percy Shelley had a hand in what was going on, and it would appear that Percy Shelley made changes that made the book less accessible to readers. Mary Shelley's writing was much clearer and easier to understand, but Percy Shelley was editing her work so much that he would change maybe a 2-word phrase into a 4-word phrase. The language in it is beautiful, but it's less accessible. I hear a lot of people say that they struggle with the language, and that's just because that's how Percy Shelley wrote. There are two very important things that Percy Shelley had a hand in when this book was conceived. And the first is the character of Victor Frankenstein. So Percy really underplayed Victor's level of selfishness and narcissism. And it's very possible that, or really any of his negative attributes, it's possible that Percy saw a bit of himself in Victor because Victor was an outcast. Percy was also an outcast. He was an atheist. And so a lot of people didn't want to include him in their social groups. So he might have saw a bit of himself. But Percy also changed the ending a bit. Mary's version was much more vague, which is funny because a lot of people, when they read the book, think to themselves, what am I supposed to do with this ending? Where do these characters even end up? And that is Percy Shelley's less ambiguous ending. Mary really had it left wide open at the end. I think Percy had a hand in quite a bit of this, and I think those two things that he changed up a bit are really important to how we see this book. But a little bit more about the actual novel, so we can get into kind of what's going on in the book. In the 1818 original version of Frankenstein, so we get all of the narration from a man named Walton. Walton is writing letters to a family member of his. We find out that he is traveling. He's traveling as far north as he can, and he's trying to make discoveries that no man has ever made before. He is trying to really change the world in his discoveries, and he's kind of going against popular belief in doing so. And he comes across this man. The man is floating on a chunk of ice, and they take him onto the ship. They have to convince him to come onto the ship, by the way. They're out in the middle of ice and freezing water, and they have to convince this man to get onto their boat. But they convince this man to get onto their boat, and this is where the tale of Frankenstein really picks up. It's no longer about Walton. It is now about Victor Frankenstein. And yes, the man that they pick up out of this chunk of ice is Victor Frankenstein, and he begins relating his story. We find out that, first of all, as a young man, he was very interested in a man called Cornelius Agrippa, and Cornelius Agrippa was very interested in alchemy. Victor Frankenstein's fascination with Cornelius Agrippa was not taken well by his father, also by his college professors once he finally leaves. It's important to note that Victor is, for the most part, self-taught. So he was learning from someone has pretty much been proven wrong by science at this time. So he teaches himself everything. He finally goes off to school. His professors tell him, no, you can't be reading Cornelius Agrippa. They think he's ridiculous for it. He finally finds a professor who is interested in Agrippa, but also gets him into learning other things as well. The important facets of science of Mary Shelley's time is what Victor starts learning about. Victor eventually decides that he is going to do what no man has ever done before, and that is create life. And it's important to note that historically at this time, Mary Shelley was witnessing, scientists had discovered that you can kind of animate a dead body when you run an electrical current through the body. And so this was what Mary Shelley was kind of looking at the time when she wrote her book. So we don't know much about the monster's creation. All we know is that electricity is highly involved in the actual creation. After the monster is brought back to life, Victor is appalled. He's terrified because his original plan in making the monster was to make the perfect human. And this parallels so strongly to the story of creation where Adam was meant to be the perfect man, the perfect creature. But Adam ends up turning on God. And this is kind of how Victor views his creation. The monster's ugly to him. He has this skin that's kind of a little translucent and yellow, and you can see all the veins underneath it. His eyes are almost completely white. You can't even hardly see his pupils. He's very disgusting to look at from what Victor says. Another reminder, this is all coming from Walton as well. We aren't hearing all of this firsthand, this is all coming from Walton. And so everything that we hear is very questionable. Did the monster actually look like this? So on and so forth. Victor runs off, and he goes to bed. What we see of Victor throughout the story is that he is very grief-stricken, he's very melancholic, very depressed, and it would appear that he has like a depressive episode or something, but no matter how you describe it, it's a very weird response for him to just go to bed. But I think the reason that he goes to bed is because this is supposed to mirror Mary Shelley's creation of the book. So, like I said, this came to Mary Shelley in a dream. So Victor Frankenstein goes to bed, and he has a nightmare. And in this nightmare, he thinks that he is kissing his cousin Elizabeth, who is also his love interest, the woman he's supposed to marry, but soon realizes that he's actually holding the corpse of his dead mother, and there are worms crawling all over her, and it's very disturbing to him. So he wakes up, and he is just in this state where after you wake up from a nightmare, everything is terrifying to you. You're in this really weird stage, and you don't really know what's going on. You're trying to understand, and Victor wakes up, and right in his face is the monster, and he's kind of smiling at him, but he's also reaching his hand out, and Victor takes this as menacing, and so he runs, and he kind of does this whole never looking back sort of idea. Victor, once he finally returns to his home, he finds that the monster is gone. And he's like, oh, thank God, which is, again, another weird response that he just says, okay, good, I no longer have to deal with him. This is another example of Victor's selfishness. He fails to worry about other people's safety. He's more concerned throughout the book for his own. Later on, Victor is finally face to face with the monster. And he doesn't want to talk to him. Finally, the monster says, look, you just need to hear my story. You need to know what's going on with me. And so the monster tells him everything that has happened since Victor kind of ran off and he's been on his own. So the monster ended up kind of learning about life by himself. He finds himself living in a little shack outside of the DeLacy family home. The monster learns how to read and learns how to write from the DeLacys. We also find out he's kind of learning his whole understanding of the world in general from the DeLacys and also from some books that he has found. And coincidentally, one of the books that he finds is Victor Frankenstein's notes on the monster's creation. And so he learns how he was made. But also one of the books that he finds is Paradise Lost. And if you aren't familiar with Paradise Lost, it's this very long poem written by Milton. It tells the story of when Satan was cast down from heaven and the fall of Adam and Eve from the perspective of Satan himself. And it makes Satan this kind of anti-hero in a way. It's more sympathetic to his situation. It's more sympathetic to Eve. It kind of casts Adam in a different light, and it casts God in a different light. This is what the monster is learning about life from. He's learning about it from the DeLacy's, and he's learning about it from the books that he reads. And the monster is actually very kind to the DeLacy's. He loves them like his own family. And he helps them out in many ways. He realizes that the man Felix has like all of this work that he has to do all the time. And so the monster goes out and he helps him with his work. He gets his wood. He clears away the snow. And he's always doing stuff like this for the family. Well, he gets to a point one day where he just wants to take the chance and meet the family. And he hopes that they'll take him in. When he enters the home, he meets the old man living in the household, and the old man is blind. And so he takes to the monster very well, actually, because he's blind. He can't see him. And so he takes to him very well, and things are going fine until the two children enter the home. And everything, all hell breaks loose, basically. They start screaming and yelling. They're kicking him out of the house. They're terrified of him. And the monster is just distraught. I mean, he's angry, he's upset, and he kind of runs away. And when he comes back, he's hoping to make amends, but he finds out that they're planning on leaving. They're saying that they have to leave because they're afraid for their grandfather. The monster naturally burns the house down. That is his first act of violence. The monster only acts out when he's treated terribly by the people that he cares about. The reason that the creature is so dependent upon being loved and cared for by other people is because he has learned this from the DeLacy's. He's learned this from the books that he reads, that relationships with others are the most important things, that it's okay to rely on others for your happiness. And so he really doesn't know any better. This is just, to him, relationships and connection are the most important thing, and he can't have that because of the way he looks. The monster kind of goes off on his own, and it is what it is. After everything with the DeLacy's, the monster finds William, who is Victor's younger brother. And he is hoping that when he meets William, William will not be prejudiced against him, but William is terrified of him. So when William starts screaming, the monster, he's completely unaware of his strength, and so he's trying to silence William, but he ultimately ends up strangling him. And it can be taken two different ways. It can be taken as he didn't know that he was that strong, or he killed him because he was a Frankenstein. I think it's somewhere in the middle. I really do. I don't think that it was intentional, but I also don't think that it was entirely innocent either. I think what happened was that he was trying to silence William, but he was so angry that he was a Frankenstein that maybe, like, he was taking out his aggression more than he thought, maybe unconsciously. Anyways, this is what ultimately brought Victor back to Geneva, to his home. Because William died, and because Josephine, a family friend who'd been there his whole life, was being framed for this. And the creature did frame her. After hearing this whole story, the monster just says, all right, my expectation of you is that you create me a wife. Adam had an Eve, and I request an Eve, and I will be good. Make me happy, and I will be good. And Victor doesn't really know what to do. He is afraid that it won't work the way the monster thinks it will, but the monster it puts him in a position where he basically says, I'm going to kill everyone you know if you don't make me an Eve. And so Victor says yes. So Victor takes off, and he's kind of traveling around with his friend Henry because he's melancholic, he's depressed, and he needs to travel, and he travels for about 2 years. And finally he settles down and he starts working on the monster's bride, basically. Sorry, I'm using movie terminology. I probably shouldn't. He knows that the creature is watching him. There are a few times he looks up and he sees the creature on the mountains. And he sees the creature outside. And at one point, he sees the creature outside. He's smiling. And Frankenstein takes this as him kind of sneering in an evil way. But it's possible that he was just excited. And Victor kind of freaks out. And he's thinking, you know, if I create this other monster, you know, I don't have control over the one that I made. What if this one doesn't want to do what the creature says that they'll do? What if they want to have children? What if they become more angry because they can't have children? All of this is running through his head, and he rips his creation to pieces. And the creature just freaks out. He screams and he runs away. And Victor's just kind of left there. So Victor the next day travels back. It's kind of a long boat ride for him. It's rough. And when he gets back, he is framed by the townspeople for killing someone. He finds out that the creature had done it. And it was his best friend Henry, which is really hard for him to handle. So at this point, the creature has killed his best friend and his younger brother. So he finally sees the creature again, and the creature says, you know, I'll see you on your wedding night. Victor doesn't even know what to think of this. His first inclination is that the monster is going to kill him on his wedding night. You know, so when he gets back to Geneva, he pushes it off as much as he can, but finally there's nothing he can do. And so on his and Elizabeth's wedding night, Victor is kind of running around, searching his house because he's afraid that the monster is just going to show up. But he hears a scream from his bedroom, and he comes in, and Elizabeth is kind of strewn across the bed, and the monster is just jumping out of the window, and he jumps into the lake. Of course, Victor is upset and he's freaking out, and this is the first time that Victor is actually going after the creature himself. And so now, you know, the creature has killed Elizabeth, Henry, and William, and his father also dies in this process. He wasn't killed by the creature, but Victor blames the creature for it anyways. And so Victor finally goes after the creature, and this is how Walton ends up finding Victor, is because Victor is running after the creature. The creature wants him to come into this icy landscape where he knows Victor can't survive. And so Walton finishes hearing this story. That Walton's boat and his crew, they're all trapped kind of in this ice. And so the crew says, look, if the ice breaks up, you need to let us just turn around. We all just want to turn around and get out of here. We don't want to keep going forward. And Walton agrees with this, but Victor makes this long speech about how they can't abandon their project, even though throughout the whole tale that Victor had been relating, he had been kind of offering up this moral of don't go beyond your means and, you know, don't do more than you should do. But now he's saying, oh no, keep going. And I think this is because if they were to turn around, they'd be going the opposite direction of the creature. And Victor was still expecting to destroy his creature. They ultimately decide that they're going to turn around because it's too dangerous. It's too dangerous for them to keep going. And Victor ends up dying. He says, promise me that if I die before I can kill the creature, if the creature were to be in front of you, basically, if you were to come across him, you'll kill it. And Walton doesn't really know what to say, but Victor dies. And the creature shows up. He ends up getting into Victor's room. And he laments Victor's death. And he says, this isn't really what I wanted. And he ultimately says, I'm gonna go kill myself. He jumps off of the boat. And he sails off into nothingness. And he's lost in the darkness and the waves. A lot of this is very different when we get to the movie. Because when Mary Shelley writes this book, there is no clear moral. The moral that the world kind of took out of it is don't go beyond your means. Don't try to play God. Don't usurp God's role. And this happens right away. Or this book was adapted into a play called Presumption. And this play is kind of what starts everything, what changes how we look at Frankenstein. And Presumption came out not that long after Mary Shelley's 1818 novel came out. And in Presumption, it's entirely based on this idea that you shouldn't play God. It takes kind of this one-sided argument that Mary Shelley wasn't really offering in her novel. And we also get the introduction of a assistant, which is crucial to our understanding now of Frankenstein. So thanks to Presumption, we get a lot of the ideas that we now have in the Frankenstein 1931 created by Universal. I'm not going to really go through what happens in this movie because it's very well known. I guess I can run through it very fast. But Victor Frankenstein is kind of this crazy, evil scientist in the beginning, and he says, I'm going to be God. I'm going to find out how I can be God, and I'm going to create life from death. And he does that. He and his assistant, in the original Presumption play, this assistant was named Fritz. He wasn't named Igor. But he becomes Igor in these Universal films. So he and Igor are, dig up all of these body parts, and they have to be perfect. They have to be absolutely perfect, which is just like Victor. Victor spent a lot of time looking for his body parts because he wanted perfect body parts. He was trying to create the perfect human. So in the beginning, it's not that far off, although Victor is not presented as kind of this crazy evil scientist that we get in 1931. So they can't find a brain, and Igor kind of screws up and ends up getting a criminal brain. He's supposed to get a normal brain, and he gets him a criminal brain. So they create the monster with a criminal brain. And this is supposed to be the reason that the monster is evil. So they do the creation, and you get the whole, it's alive! Some of the most prominent and most well-known quotes are from this movie. And so after the creation, the creature is just aggressive most of the time. I mean, he is prompted. Igor is mean to him. It's usually Igor in the beginning. And in the beginning, Igor is really poking at him and tempting him. But he's very aggressive from the outset. And so this just carries throughout the film. He ends up killing a little girl because she's teaching him how to throw flowers into the water, and he mistakes her for a flower, and he throws her into the water. And when the townsfolk see this, they go after the monster, and you get this mob of people chasing after the monster, and it all ends in the scene of Victor. I'm sorry, his name actually isn't Victor. His name is Henry in the film, which is a really strange change that they decided to make. And especially because as a cultural icon, it's always Victor Frankenstein. It's never Henry Frankenstein. So I think that's really interesting that people still stuck to Victor. But Henry Frankenstein and the monster end up in a windmill. And in this windmill, they're fighting, and then, the monster throws Henry down, and they burn the windmill down, and supposedly burn the monster inside of it. But he comes back. The creature never dies. He comes back more and more and more. And in the 1931 movie, it's important to note that the creature was played by Boris Karloff, and Boris Karloff was incredible. Just a little information on how they ended up with Boris Karloff. So, Bela Lugosi was originally supposed to play the creature, because he was very famous from playing Dracula, and it was kind of assumed by Universal Films that he was going to be kind of their monster character. But when Bela Lugosi found out that, he was gonna be wearing all of this makeup, so you couldn't even really tell it was him, that he wasn't going to be talking, because the monster doesn't talk in this. He felt like it was an insult to him, and he refused. Even though he comes back and he does end up playing Frankenstein, Frankenstein versus the Wolfman. because Lon Chaney ends up playing after Boris Karloff stops playing the monster. So Boris Karloff stops playing the monster because they start making the monster speak. And this actually, he was afraid that when they started making the monster speak, he was basically going to become a clown. And he was right. He was right. You know, I don't agree that the monster shouldn't speak, but he was right in that the creature did become kind of this laughingstock once he started talking. I mean, he became a joke to people. He was funny instead of scary. And so Boris Karloff kind of took off once the monster started speaking, and Lon Chaney took over. But Lon Chaney also played the Wolfman, and so they couldn't have Lon Chaney playing both characters, and so Bela Lugosi finally stepped in, which finding out about this kind of hurt my perception of Bela Lugosi a little bit, just because he was only willing to play the monster once the monster was famous. That was kind of a bummer for me, but I also don't know a lot about Bela Lugosi. Anyways, the important differences between these two renditions of this story are staggering. I mean, a lot of these differences are really important in understanding how we see Frankenstein today and why people look back on the book and they don't like the book. One of the biggest differences is the depiction of Victor Frankenstein. So, like I said, in the film, his name is Henry, and he is this crazy evil scientist in the beginning who ends up changing by the end. He is presented as a villain. He says he wants to become God, and that's his precise goal in doing this, is that he wants to be God. And in the end, he's pitied because he wants to kill the monster. And he's not selfish. By the end, he's presented as learning his lesson. He isn't selfish. In the beginning he was, but he transforms. This is entirely different in the book. He's not this crazy evil scientist. He was a student who wanted to expand knowledge. He wanted to know more than what was presented to him. And he's extremely selfish the whole way through, even though he is very well admired. It's important to recognize that the Victor Frankenstein character we see in the movie is kind of feared in the beginning. People look at him like, you're crazy. And this may have something to do with the fact that our Victor Frankenstein character in the movie does tell everybody what he's doing, and Victor in the book does not. Victor in the book is also self-taught, and he's focused entirely on his own beliefs. He appears to be pitiable throughout because he's melancholic and he's afraid of everything, and he's also more humanized. He's a complicated character and his thoughts and actions are all complicated. But the movie kind of dumbs him down to he's crazy at first and then he learns his lesson. And our Victor in the book doesn't really learn his lesson. He dies worried entirely about his own reputation. Another important difference between the two is the moment that the monster is first feared. So, in the film, the monster is antagonized, like I said earlier. So Fritz, in the beginning, Fritz/Igor, whatever we want to call him, shoves fire in his face, and the creature is afraid. This is also another important difference that I'll talk about later. But because of this, he lashes out because he's afraid of the fire and he's thrown in a dungeon. And everyone responds to him lashing out as like, oh my god, he's dangerous, he's scary, he's a monster. But it's because he's teasing the creature. And Fritz/Igor ends up getting killed because he's teasing the creature. And the creature in this he's scary because he has all these abilities to hurt people because he's so strong. But there's also so much pity for the monster. And that might not be written in. That might actually be because of Boris Karloff. Because Boris Karloff pitied the character very much and felt for him. And that's why he didn't want to play him after he started talking. But the way that Boris Karloff plays him might have a lot to do with why we pity him in the movie. And then in the book, when the monster is feared, it's because Frankenstein wakes up from his nightmare. He's already predisposed to fear something. It isn't because the monster really does anything terrifying or scary. It's because he woke up from a nightmare. And the creature in the book is more pitiable than he is fearful. I think that when you read the book, you really feel for the creature, and you're not really scared of him. At least that was my interpretation, and I think it's been a lot of other people's interpretations. Most people feel bad for the creature. And then there's also kind of a difference in the understanding of language. So when the creature first comes to life, he already understands complex communication. And it also all comes from the brain that he acquires. He's predisposed to evil. And this creature has no opportunity to do good. He is always going to be evil because he has a criminal brain. In the book, it's entirely different because the creature learns from the books he reads, and he learns from the DeLacy family. So he's predisposed to the fall of Eden and the outcast of Satan. So these become two really important themes throughout his journey. And then his actions also reflect both good and evil, and in the end he combines the two, when he says, "Evil became my good," which is also something Satan says in Paradise Lost. So it's really important to recognize that the creature is predisposed to two different things. In the movie, it's very clear you're supposed to fear him, because he's already going to be evil because he has a criminal brain. But in the book, he has the capabilities of both, and it's very clear that the creature wants to be good, and he's trying to understand what good is, and he's getting everything, because there's no one there to teach him. He's getting everything from the way people treat him, and so when people treat him badly when he does good, but they treat him differently when he does evil, then he ultimately does evil. Also, the fear of fire is very different. So in the film, it's immediate, which characterizes him as an animal, not as a human. And that he has these innate animal instincts, that he doesn't think or question anything. He doesn't have any reason to fear fire, he just does. But in the book, it's very different. He thrusts his hand in the fire because he finds it beautiful and because it provides him warmth. So he's trying to understand. He's a thinking, feeling being in the book. It's one experience for him that exemplifies beauty and utility does not equal good. He takes a lot of importance in this, and he thinks about it. The fact that it's this very important thing in his life, and it's very beautiful, but it's painful. The two characterize him differently as well. And then also the death of the child in the movie is very different from in the book. So Marie is showing the creature that flowers float, and he confuses her for a flower and throws her into the water. She is instantly kind to him. She's not afraid of him. But he kills her anyways. His criminal brain is the reason he can't act kindly. So even if he is having a good time, he still does evil. And so this is a creature that cannot act on his own. He's not thinking about what he's doing. He is just acting because his criminal brain just makes him do bad things. And so this is just a continuation of this idea that the creature is evil. And he can't escape from his evil, he just is evil. And this is what makes him pitiable, is that you see him trying to be good, but he doesn't have a choice, he just has to be evil. In the book, it's clearly very different. So William dies because he's scared. He meets this child. He has this reason that he wants to meet the child. He hopes that the child's going to be kind to him. That's all he wants, is he wants some sort of kindness and some human connection. And because William screams, he dies. It's a very complex death. It can't be explained by one singular thing. He isn't just like instantly evil. He was looking for good. He was trying to do something good, and I don't think he intentionally killed William. I think that it was an accident for the most part, and it ended up happening that way. And also, Elizabeth is very different in both. So in the movie, Elizabeth is not killed. She is the one that senses something bad will happen. The creature, because he doesn't talk, cannot tell Victor, "I'm going to see you on your wedding night." He just shows up, which it was very strange to me that he just randomly shows up in Elizabeth's bedroom. It's kind of a weird scene. He's just climbs in through the window. But she senses something bad is going to happen. Victor hears the moans of the creature, and so he locks Elizabeth in her room, but of course, while he's like super far away, he hears Elizabeth screaming because the creature got in. So he comes back in, and she's laying across the bed, but she's only hysterical. She's not dead. And the creature didn't even do anything to her. And he doesn't even see the creature. The creature gets out before they even get into the room. But they just know it's the creature. So obviously, like I said, Elizabeth dies in the book. The creature tells Victor that he's going to see him on his wedding night, and Victor searches the home in fear that the creature's going to arrive, and then he finds Elizabeth dead. He sees the creature smiling in through the window. I mean, it's an entirely different scene. And the ending. The ending is probably the most staggering difference between the two. In the film, he dies in a fire after a showdown with Henry in a windmill, which I don't know where they even got that from. But in the book, after visiting Walton and sees his creator dead, the creature jumps out the window onto a raft and disappears into the darkness. In the movie, it's very much so clear-cut. It's like this creature is gonna die, even though he doesn't. He comes back the next movie. He's got burns on him. But it's very clear they're trying to say the creature's dead. In the book, you don't know. There's no way to know. And so all of these differences kind of create this vision of a monster that we see today. It changes how we read the book. It changes how we think of the monster in general. I don't think Mary Shelley's intent was to say, don't try to be God. I don't think that her moral here was presumption is bad. I think her moral is much more complex, and I think that Percy Shelley may have been onto something when he tried to explain the moral. And Percy Shelley's moral was the way you treat people is what they're going to become. So he was focused more so on the creature and the fact that the creature was good until people started to treat him bad. I think that it's more overarching than what Percy Shelley outlined. I think what Percy Shelley said was very streamlined to one character, but I think that Mary Shelley is making a comment also on Victor Frankenstein. I think that it isn't Victor that's the monster, and it isn't the creature that's the monster. It is society that's the monster. It's the way that we view people who are different from us that's the monster. Because what we see is Victor being treated kindly. He is selfish. He isn't really a good person, but he's treated as if he's a good person because he is at the same level as other people. But the creature who is kind-hearted is treated terribly. And I think that because Mary Shelley paralleled this so well with Paradise Lost, she kind of does the same thing that Milton does. And Milton is saying, we turned Satan into the bad guy. We turned God into the good guy. We turned Eve into the bad guy and Adam into the good guy. What if they weren't? And it's all about perspective, clearly. And this book plays with perspective. We're getting this whole story from Walton. We're not getting this story from the monster. We're not getting this story from Victor. We're getting it all from Walton. And so she's making a lot of comments on perspective here, that it's not about who people really are, it's how we view them. We don't really care about the truth of people, we care about what we think, who we think people are. And I think that what we've done is really played into Mary Shelley's whole point. We saw a very base moral of this story and we kind of transformed it into this cultural icon that didn't exist. It wasn't her intention. Her original book had a subtitle, and it was The Modern Prometheus. And the important thing to recognize about the fact that this is a modern Prometheus is another comment on perspective. It's easy for people today to look back on the story of Prometheus and say Prometheus was the good guy. Because in Greek mythology, Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to the humans. Very much so related to the fall of Eden, clearly. But you can also look at fire as knowledge, and Prometheus gave humans knowledge just as the apple gave humans knowledge and whatnot. It's easy for us to look back on Prometheus and say he's the good guy, just like it's easy for us sometimes to it's easy for me to look back at Eve and say thank you. As a mythology, I'm not professing religion here, but as a mythology, I would thank Prometheus and I would thank Eve. And I think that is part of Mary Shelley's point. We look at Eve as the bad guy, but is she? We look back at Satan like he's the bad guy, but is he? Because Satan wanted to give more to the humans as well. It's God and the gods that tried to restrict humans. Now, this is a very atheist argument, I think. I think that a lot of Percy Shelley's atheism really played a role because her book is very devoid of God. Of a god of gods in general, except for, the idea of Victor as God. It's very devoid of God and religion, I think on purpose, because I think she's trying to make a comment on religion. The religions that we have are built entirely from a perspective that maybe isn't entirely accurate and kind of skews this idea of the human race. The 1931 Frankenstein movie was great for the time that it was created, but is it great for time now? Because I think that the argument that Mary Shelley is making in 1818 could really resound with audiences today. I think that what she is trying to say has a lot to do with what people are trying to say today too. There are these huge social justice arguments right now based on perspective, you know, how we're viewing other people and how those viewpoints are skewing the way we treat them. And I want to say that I'm being very particular about the movies, but I love them. As a horror fan, as someone who is just absolutely in love with the Universal monster movies, I do love these movies, and I do accept them as having very important roles in our culture. But I also adore this book. It's one of my favorite books, and I love every second of it, and I do want it to get what it deserves, and that's a good adaptation. We've done everything with Victor and the creature, except depict them as they are. We have yet to see something that gives us Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. But that is all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm sorry you had to listen to my voice for what's probably going to be like 45 minutes. But I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys learned some things about Frankenstein, and I hope that you guys kind of jump on my side and say, hey, let's give the creature his justice. But that's why this episode is called Killing the Creature, because that's what we've done. We've kind of destroyed Mary Shelley's creation, and we've turned it into something new. We've brought new life to it. Oh boy, now I'm going to start doing voices. I'm really tired. Without further ado, I will leave you guys. But first, make sure that you subscribe to us on Podbean. We are on YouTube, Google Play, iTunes. We also have a giveaway coming up, which is really exciting. Nikki has some movies she's giving away. I have some really cool horror-themed little, like, accessories. One of them is a pin, an enamel pin, and the other is an enamel, a keychain. They're really cool. And we really want to give these away to you guys. So all you have to do is leave us a review. Leave us a review on iTunes, and you're going to go into our drawing. Tell your friends about us. Leave us a review. Win some cool things. Yeah. We will see you guys next week, and Nikki and Rachel will be back, I promise. You won't have to listen to me for another 45 minutes. All right, bye guys.